Welcome everyone to Buddha's Center. My name is Jeff Allen. Today, once again, we're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. Specifically, we arrived at the section on relying on a spiritual friend or reliance on the teacher, sometimes translated as guru devotion. So we'll kind of pick apart what relying on a teacher means today, as we did last week, and we'll go into as much detail as we need to in order to get a full understanding of what this idea of relying upon a teacher is, what it's for, what kind of student one should be, how we rely on this teacher in thought, how we rely on this teacher in practice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The benefits, the faults of not relying, the benefits of relying, the faults of not relying. So we'll go through the outline. That wasn't the whole outline, but those were just some of the points that we'll go over. So before we get started with the teaching today, as always, let's get into an intentional posture that allows us to kind of physically set our motivation, and our minds are saying, okay, now we're going to get into a physical posture that will allow us to eventually practice better because of the alignment of our channels and so forth. But we're also doing it so we intentionally get into a posture so that we tell ourselves that, yes, now we're going to focus, we're going to pay attention. We're going to set a specific kind of intention. We're doing specific spiritual practice. So this kind of also tells us by indication and reminds us that we're doing something to move closer to Buddhahood, because this is a posture that the Buddha taught us to get into. And it's a posture that the great masters previously got into in order to achieve their aim. So likewise, I'll get into this posture so that I can become a great Indian Pandit, so that I can become as qualified as the great Indian Pandits and the great masters of Tibet and so forth, because like them, I'm relying on a physical posture in order to start to get into meditation. So we rely on the 7-point Vairocana posture, as we've gone over many times. The legs best in the Vajra posture, but whatever posture we can put them in, half lotus, cross-legged, legs on the floor, whatever we can do physically at this time, not to get too distracted by physical posture. If we have some sort of physical impediment that won't allow us to sit in a cross-legged posture, we would obviously not do that. And we could also imagine ourselves in that posture. If we, according to Tantrayana, can imagine ourselves with various numbers of arms and colored faces and so forth, we can certainly imagine that we're sitting in the Vajra posture if we can't yet. Because we don't yet have all of these arms either, but we're imagining that we do so that we can eventually have them. So likewise, we can imagine that we're in this Vajra posture, so we're setting those mental imprints to be able to in the future get into this posture. So our legs are cross-legged in whatever position we can get them into, as mentioned. Our hands, one on top of the other, right on top of left, with our thumbs slightly touching, with making almost a diamond pattern, and then slightly in our lap in a comfortable position. Our back very straight like a stack of coins. Our shoulders in a comfortable position, not rigid. Our arms out slightly bowed, part of the shoulders, part of the hands. It says to have it like a bow. We see Marpa sitting like that when we see pictures of Marpa, very, very bowed. So this is the posture of the great saints. Then we have our head slightly tilted downward, with our eyes focused on the tip of the nose, but for the sake of just grabbing some focal object that we're going to eventually make disappear, because we are focusing on our mind when we do meditation. So our objects of observation of our meditation are mental objects. So here we're just focusing in this way so that we can eventually just shut off our sense conscious, shut off our eye consciousness. We're not trying to, with our eye consciousness, perceive anything. We're trying to, with our mental consciousness, perceive these objects of observation. So we are leaving our eyes slightly open, not shut, but not open all the way as to make for excitement or some kind of visual distraction. So we're just opening them slightly and focusing just in front of the nose or down at the nose, And when we have our tongue slightly behind our teeth, with our mouth in a comfortable position, this allows for our mouth not to fill up with water, but also allows for our mouth to have a circulation of saliva and not dry up. And by breathing in through our nose, then our mouth doesn't dry up either. And we can then sustain very long periods of meditation once we're capable of doing so, without having to get up to take a drink or being distracted by our mouth filling up with water. We're really trying to be able to get to a point of mental quiescence, a point of calm abiding, where it is our mind that is focused on some object and only that object and nothing else. So it's for that reason that we try to pull back the physical senses more and more and focus solely on what we're concentrating on mentally. So we have the 7 parts of this posture, and now we'll add an 8th, meaning the breath. So let's just take a moment to breathe in and out. Take the breath all the way to the top, meaning breathe in all the way in a very normal fashion, not in an aggressive fashion or breathing so slowly that we feel as though we're not getting enough breath. Just in a normal fashion, we're breathing in and out, taking it all the way to the top of the breath, and then exhaling it all of the way. And then we're counting those breaths as we're doing it. So what we're trying to do now is get our minds just kind of to a neutral state, a more focused state, focused on something reasonable that doesn't have all these emotions attached to it, that doesn't have attachment, that doesn't have hatred or aversion. It's just a more neutral place from which we can grow virtuous aspirations and virtuous practices from. So let's focus on the breath. And focus only on the breath and the number of breaths that we're getting through. Let's think about today why we're here, what the real reason we came to a Buddhist class was. Think about the various sufferings we have to experience. Think about the various dissatisfactions that we have with our current state. Think of the pain that we have to experience, physical pain. Think about the mental pain we have to experience, all of the anxieties we have to experience. Being separated from pleasant things when we don't want to. Meeting with unpleasant things when we don't want to. Not getting what we want. When we do get what we think we want, we find that that form of happiness that we craved so much, that we chased after so much, turns into a state of suffering sooner or later. Either we're forcibly separated from it or we separate ourselves from it. Our loved ones pass away and die. We don't want that to happen. We're forcibly separated from our loved ones. The new car that we loved so much is now deteriorated and rusted. We find that it's a source of suffering now, and we chase after something newer and think that that bait, think that that thing that we chase after will make us actually happy, when we know that the same exact nature, a thing with the same exact nature, eventually turned into a form of suffering. But these forms of happiness bait us over and over again to believe that cyclic existence isn't full of unhappiness and suffering. But the Buddha stated that all contaminated forms of happiness are suffering. All contaminated things are suffering. They would either be manifest suffering or they would be contaminated happiness that within it has a self-destruct mechanism that always turns into a form of suffering, has no lasting happiness. We chase after it though, as though it will last, as though it will always make us happy. We believe at that time the object inherently has some sort of happiness within it. And then we see that its contaminated nature turns it into something other than what we originally thought that it was. But it's the same object. Our experience with it, our relationship with that object has changed. Our expectations of that object has changed. And we recognize that we will have to be born again and again and again into this situation where we have these manifest sufferings. And we chase after happiness that actually is a form of suffering. And even if when we're born in a high realm, we don't have to experience these manifest sufferings or the suffering of change, contaminated happiness that changes into suffering. Even if we're born in a formless realm where we don't have the suffering and the suffering of change, we do have what is called the pervasive compounded suffering. We'll be forced again and again into a set of aggregates that has among those three types of suffering. So meaning that all sentient beings, no matter what realm of cyclic existence they are in, have pervasive compounded suffering, have to die, have to pass away, and then are thrown into another set of aggregates, have to be at the peak of existence, and then suddenly are forced into a hell realm rebirth. We recognize that this is our plight, and that the Buddha stated that all of these terrible things that we have to experience have causes. The Buddha stated that the causes could be eliminated. Therefore, what the causes create can be eliminated. And the Buddha stated that cessation of suffering altogether is possible because the elimination of the causes is possible. And then the Buddha taught us how to eliminate the causes through the truth of path that were found in the truth of origin. When we think about these sufferings that we have to endure, we think about our loved ones and recognize that they have to endure those sufferings as well. We think of strangers and recognize that they have to endure those sufferings as well, even though they want happiness, just like we want happiness. They don't want to have suffering, just like we don't want to have suffering. But because we're in cyclic existence, both of us, we have this common link of suffering that pervades all beings in cyclic existence. And we think about our enemies. We think about how solid that term enemy is or isn't. We recognize that enemy isn't solid because since beginningless time, we've been born again and again and again. We've had every relationship with every sentient being we can imagine. They've been our friends, they've been our enemies, and they've been strangers to us. They've been so kind to us in previous times, as kind as the kindest person is to us right now. Whatever the kindest person you can think of, every sentient being has been that kind to you. And if someone was kind to you 2 years ago, but you maybe forgot, that doesn't mean that they weren't kind to you. So we have to shift our perspective and start to understand that all sentient beings have been so kind to us. We've been their children, all of them. They've nurtured us when we were so vulnerable. Every sentient being has taken care of us in our most vulnerable state. And when we think of those three types of beings, we arrive at this idea, well, how nice it would be if they could have happiness and be free from suffering. I don't want to have, I want to have happiness. I want to be free from suffering. Likewise, they do too. They've all been so kind to me. I wish I could repay their kindness by bringing them to happiness and getting them out of suffering, just like I want to be. We look at all the various varieties of sentient beings, and we think, is it possible for me to bring all sentient beings to a state of happiness free from suffering? And the answer is no. I'm not qualified. I'm not reliable enough in order to bring all sentient beings to a state of happiness free from suffering. Why am I not reliable enough? Because I'm in suffering and I don't have omniscience. I don't know what each and every sentient being needs at this moment in order to be free from their samsara. So in order for myself to be free, and in order for me to free all sentient beings, I will need to become a Buddha. In order to have infinite happiness, which I seek, and in order to have complete freedom from fear, which I seek, I have to become a Buddha. And by becoming a Buddha, I can then be reliable enough to free all sentient beings from suffering and the causes of suffering by showing them the truth that I have found. And I will do so because of my loving concern for all sentient beings that I've realized along the path. I'll have loving concern and wisdom and power. And this is what is necessary to help sentient beings. This is what is necessary to have infinite happiness and fearlessness. It's necessary to be a Buddha. So in order to become a Buddha, we have to achieve the wisdom arisen from hearing, analysis, and meditation. So I'm here today, when we look at what our motivation is, what our motivation should be, I'm here today to gain the wisdom arisen from hearing, analysis, and meditation so that I can become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So it's with that motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of sentient beings that we recite these prayers, that we listen to these teachings. And when we recite these prayers, we think about the meaning, the deep, deep meaning that each and every one of these prayers has. The implicit meaning of the 5 Mahayana paths presented in the Heart Sutra, and the explicit meaning about the lack of true establishment of all phenomena, the lack of true establishment of those 5 Mahayana paths of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning. Those Teata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisoha, the stages of the path of maturation for one being to become a Buddha. So as we recite these prayers, make sure we set this motivation that I'm reciting these so I can become a Buddha as quickly as possible. The only way I can have infinite happiness and be free from cyclic existence, free from fears, is to become a Buddha. The only way I can help sentient beings be free from fears and have infinite happiness is to become a Buddha. I'm here today on a Sunday to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Everything I'm doing here today is for the sake of becoming a Buddha. And with that, let's recite the Heart Sutra. The Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the Samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination, and at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way. Seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form. Emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind consciousness dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times, by means of Prajnaparamita, fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as truth, since there is no deception. Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way. Teata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhisoha. Thus Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, the whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Ngala njumbe ne jo namba ne ngushe do chunga yi do do jen druba bolama yi oboshin si ne son kandro so la sha tse lo aga samara tashandara samara be aga samara tash. Aga samara dashandara samara yambe te ata on gade gade baragade barazangade buddhiso baba gancho sanji ga yedem bedoje she bodoji bodoji shawadoji ragi baje me dem beje danji shedin goye so ha gerin donja je she wa da me don no be jan dan de wa da Tumba Junjin Bunzun Zunjuji Dashi De Jan Denda De Le Jo. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. Zajim Budi Joje Medo Dari Rari Nire Yemadi Zanye Jindo Me
I send forth this jewel mandala to you, precious Guru. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Gani Radayami Zanye Jodan Zanye Jona La Janjo Badu Danye Jazuchi Dagi Chishe Jibe Zananje Drula Benjia Zanje Jubajo Zanye Jodan Zanye Jonam La Janjo Vadu Danye Jazuchi Dagi Chishe Jibe Zananje Drula Benjia Zanje Jubajo Zanje Jodan Zanye Jonam La Janjo Vadu Danye Jazuchi Dagi Chinye Jibe Zananje Drula Benjia Zanje Jubajo. May this teaching be understood in the language of all sentient beings. Okay. So once again, we're speaking of relying on a teacher. And before we get started right into the Lam Rim Chemo, I'd like to read a quote from Dignaga's text, the Pramana Samuchaya, the Compendium of Valid Cognition. We went over it on Thursday night in some good detail. We can always go into it with a lot more detail, but we went into these two lines with some good detail. But I think that they have a very important connection to relying on a teacher also. So I'll read this again as I did Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll talk about how it relates to relying on a teacher. So the one who has transformed into the reliable guide, motivated by altruism to benefit sentient beings, the teacher, Sugata, and protector to you, I make prostrations. Okay, so who is this homage being paid to? That's the first question, right? Who's the object of homage? Who is Dignaga talking about when he says the one who has transformed into a reliable guide? So this is referring to Buddha Shakyamuni. This is a homage to Buddha Shakyamuni. And Dharmakirti, who came 100 years after Dignaga, maybe 7th century, Dignaga was 6th century, saw these two lines and thought how amazing it was that Dignaga was able to pack so much meaning into these two lines about Buddha Shakyamuni and his qualifications, etc., and how it related to Buddha Shakyamuni's maturation as a practitioner, and how it related to the result of that maturation as a practitioner, and why we would listen to a being who matured in such a way. It begins by saying the one who is transformed into a reliable guide. So when we're speaking about a teacher, right? Do we want a teacher who is not a reliable guide? So do we want a teacher? So if we want to learn the English language, do we want someone who kind of knows how to speak English, gives us a kind of a way of speaking English, so that we go out and then we go to speak our English and half of it's right, half of it's wrong. And people laugh at us and think, where did you learn English? If we tell them, oh, I know how to speak English. I relied on this teacher. Well, we didn't rely on the right teacher in that case, because they didn't teach us English properly, or we weren't listening properly. But let's use the case in this case where we weren't taught it properly. Now we go to try and speak English. We don't know how to do it because we weren't taught it properly. Why? Because our English teacher wasn't a reliable guide to bring us to the wisdom understanding the English language. So in this case, we wanted to learn English. So we needed a reliable guide. We needed a teacher, someone who could bring us, where are they guiding us from what point to what point? If we don't know English, they're taking us from the point of an ignorance of the English language to a point of wisdom
of the English language. So in order to go from ignorance of the English language to wisdom that has no ignorance of the English language, we have to eradicate all of those misknowings. And to know what those misknowings are, in order to get the wisdom, we've got to be taught. So the person that's teaching us needs to know all of the details that are necessary to tell us in order for us to be able to speak English. Makes sense, right? In order for us to, become fluent in English, if we have one teacher and we're picking one teacher who's going to show us how to become fluent, they need to know how to become fluent. They need to know all the proper steps they would have to take us through in order for us to arrive at the wisdom that understands the English language. So that would be someone reliable, right? Someone who knows all the ins and outs, as fluent, it knows how to teach it. Would that alone make them reliable? Well, those are, knowing it would make them reliable. They would make them able to teach it, right? If they know it, if they can speak and everything, right? And they know it. But they have to want to also, right? So just knowing it, and they have to, if you're wanting to learn the English language and they know the English language, they have to have no motivation to trick you either. So they have to have a pure motivation that all they want is for you to learn this English language and that they know how to teach this English language. So they would need to not have any kind of bad motivations at the same time, because if they knew how to speak the English language, knew how to teach the English language, but had some kind of impure motivation, they may teach you something just slightly incorrectly because they may not have your best interest in mind. So then we get to this next part of the reliable teacher. So it says, it says, the one who transformed into a reliable teacher. So it doesn't say that Buddha Shakyamuni always was a reliable teacher. It says that Buddha Shakyamuni transformed into a reliable teacher. And what made Buddha Shakyamuni reliable was that, motivated by great compassion, right? So the Buddha's motivation is great compassion for all sentient beings. He sought out a pathway that could transform him into a reliable guide, because Buddha Shakyamuni was a prince at the time, knew that he couldn't free sentient beings from suffering, couldn't give them fearlessness as a prince, and knew that he couldn't give them infinite happiness as a prince, could maybe give them some mundane, more happiness, worldly happiness than they have, but he already understood as a bodhisattva that all contaminated things are suffering. So the Buddha understood that all these kind of contaminated things that he could do for people at a worldly level as a prince were not going to free them from suffering altogether and give them infinite happiness. So out of compassion, the Buddha left to find a teacher who could teach him a way to help all sentient beings, basically. Could teach him how to be free, how to mature to the fullest level, and then how he could then mature sentient beings to the fullest level. So then the Buddha, motivated by great compassion, went out and sought teachings and sought a teacher, went to two separate teachers. First teacher had a very, very high level of understanding, of concentration, but the Buddha, as a bodhisattva, through his intense analysis and understanding, realized that that first teacher, even though he had realized these super high levels of concentration, which mimicked bliss and happiness, they were just mimicking it, and it was a temporary state. So then the Buddha moved on and said, even though this teacher said, you've learned it all, you're in the great state, you're here, you're with me, my students are your students now. The Buddha said, but you're not a reliable guide because you haven't taken me to that state. You haven't shown me the pure truth, which will alleviate all my fears and and bring me to a state of infinite happiness. So he goes to another teacher, the highest teacher in the world at the time. This teacher is at the peak of existence in meditative concentration. the peak of formless realm existence, has no suffering of suffering, no suffering of change, but still has this pervasive compounded suffering. And the Buddha gets to this point of realizing this highest state that this teacher's in. This teacher tells them that they're in nirvana, that they've realized the highest state. And the Buddha recognizes through analysis, through discerning wisdom, through all of the things that he has been taught since all of these lifetimes of studying and maturing this mental continuum, that there's an error, that there is still pervasive compounded suffering because this teacher has not transcended cyclic existence, has just been baited by feeling, by some sort of discrimination and attention and so forth, that turns into a feeling and an intention, into believing that there is some sort of nirvana that's taken place. So this happiness is deceptive in this case as well. Or this state was deceptive in this case as well. And Buddha Shakyamuni knew that this state wasn't permanent. And Buddha Shakyamuni was seeking a permanent end of suffering and a permanent state of infinite happiness. That's what Buddha was seeking. Buddha wasn't seeking 10% happiness, 20% happiness, 30%. I think everyone here, if you could, how much happiness do you want? 10%, 20%, it's pretty obvious you're going to say 100% happiness. So the Buddha was not satisfied with anything other than 100% happiness all the time, every time, and infinite. And the Buddha wasn't satisfied with pushing down sufferings for now that would later come back up. And the Buddha saw that final teacher as a teacher who was teaching something that would temporarily quell sufferings, but later they would pop back up. Even the suffering of suffering, the most mundane kind of form of suffering that happens in the desire realm, would pop back up because the karma and the afflictions would throw that being, even though he or she had realized this highest realm, back into another set of aggregates within cyclic existence. And those set of aggregates could be in the hell realm. So the Buddha realized that this teacher didn't have a capital T, hadn't realized that final point. So then the Buddha leaves, says, you didn't realize nirvana, and goes for 6 years into the forest and engages in meditation, engages in practice, takes all this analysis that he's done for many lifetimes, and in this lifetime as a bodhisattva, takes all this analysis, and then for 6 years in meditative concentration in the jungle with some companions, just does aesthetic practices and focuses on this, and does what Geshe Dorje Damdu calls a self-trial, right? To see if the medicine's any good or not. So the Buddha says, I've realized these dependent originations. I have these concentration states that allow me to focus in on this dependent origination that I've understand. And now let me try it on myself. Let me see if my mind can become more and more refined, if I can get myself to a state where I no longer have suffering and I have infinite happiness. And if I can bring myself to that state, I recognize all sentient beings have a mental consciousness, and they can too. So I know that there's this pervasive thing that we all have that's a mental consciousness. The mental consciousness is clear and knowing, defined as a mental consciousness. It's clear and knowing. It knows things, and it has the potential for maturation because it's not truly established. It's empty. So the Buddha went to test all these theories on himself and meditate and see if he could mature his mind to that state. And then he did, through realizing the lack of true establishment of all phenomena, and by getting rid of the self-cherishing attitude. These two things which kept him from having freedom from fear of cyclic existence and infinite happiness. So then he's transformed through going to teachers who didn't have the complete understanding and then refining the understanding. He came to a conclusion about reality, which was always there. He didn't make up something new. He just concluded something that was always true, and was able to conclude what was always true by analysis and then direct perception, and then refined it more and more and more and more and more, till he got to the point where he only stayed in truth. So was able to understand that which was conventionally real and ultimately real. The Buddha was able to see how conventionality just concealed the true nature of things, and then simultaneously understand those two things. Only being who can simultaneously comprehend the conventional and ultimate is a Buddha. So the Buddha has reached the peak of perfection in terms of understanding, because there's only two things to understand: conventional and ultimate reality. And the Buddha simultaneously can understand both of those things, because there's no longer imprints of the afflictions that made the Buddha unable to comprehend everything simultaneously. So the obstructions, the cognitive obstructions, the afflictive obstructions are all removed. The afflictive obstructions are removed, so therefore the Buddha no longer has fear. Once the afflictive obstructions are removed, then one no longer has cyclic existence. But even though the afflictive obstructions are removed, if the cognitive obstructions aren't removed, those obstructions to omniscience, then the imprints, the stains of those afflictions are still hanging around. And that keeps one from being a Buddha. So a Buddha is someone who did two things: not only got rid of the afflictive obstructions, but the cognitive obstructions, by having a path that united method and wisdom. Compassion united with wisdom, infinite compassion, immeasurable compassion, bodhicitta, that then unites with wisdom and allows for the removal of the afflictive obstructions and the obstructions to omniscience. So if you're working on the removal of the obstructions to omniscience, in turn, you're removing the afflictive obstructions, right? If you're getting rid of, this higher, more subtle level of impurity, you're simultaneously getting rid of the more coarse level of impurity. So this Buddha Shakyamuni is someone who checked many teachers, went to the highest philosophy there was, found it flawed, and then presented through realization a flawless philosophy that he realized himself. So it says, the one who is transformed into a reliable guide, Buddha Shakyamuni transformed into someone reliable, motivated by compassion, because you can't transform into a reliable guide if you don't have compassion, because compassion is what gives rise to bodhicitta. And you can't become omniscient without bodhicitta, without the method side. And if you're not omniscient, you aren't completely reliable to help others. So the Buddha transformed into this through finding what the truth was. And by finding the truth, he became Sugata. So it says the teacher Sugata, the one gone to bliss. The one who is free from fear and has infinite happiness, gone to bliss. Bliss is great happiness. Dewa Chembo. Dewa is happiness, Chembo is great. So we translate it as bliss. This is the great happiness. So the Buddha then says, the teacher Sugata and protector, to you I make prostrations. So why is the Buddha protector? Because the Buddha is a reliable guide that can protect us from the fear of cyclic existence, being reborn into cyclic existence. We can be protected from that because we can be free from it, and the Buddha can show us how to be free from it. And we can be protected from not having infinite happiness. The Buddha can protect us from that. So as we go for refuge to the Buddha, we're looking for the Buddha to protect us from something. What are we looking to be protected from? At the lowest case, we want to be protected from the lower realms of cyclic existence in the small scope. In the medium scope, we want to be protected from cyclic existence altogether. In the great scope, we want to be protected from cyclic existence and not having infinite happiness. We want to be protected from that. So how does this relate to relying on a teacher? Well, why do we put Buddha Shakyamuni in a capital T? Because we establish through our own valid reasoning, not through somebody told us, not because we like the way he or she looks, the Buddhas. We're establishing that through our own reasoning, that this Buddha, Shakyamuni, is a reliable guide because of what he or she, in this case, Buddha Shakyamuni, he went through and then presented. So we use our own reasoning and analysis to determine that Buddha Shakyamuni is a reasonable guide. And why? And we come up with all of these points. The same thing should be done when we look at a normal teacher. Why are we going to a class by Jeff Allen or by whoever? Why are we going to this class? Are they reliable? Do they have the information that's necessary in order to transform my mind? Are they doing it for something other than for me to transform my mind? Is this presentation being given to take your money? Or is it being given in order for you to understand more how to become free from suffering and how to have infinite happiness? Let's start there. Is the teacher there so that you can have infinite happiness and be free from suffering? You know, it doesn't mean that every teacher is, I'm not a bodhisattva. I don't have great compassion. But do they have a facsimile of it? Is their intention more like that than not? I don't mean the lingering one that's, oh, I didn't even know that was there, right? These things that we learn about ourselves as we mature more and more. But is that kind of gross intention that we know we're doing there for the purpose of the student learning, or is there something else going on there? No one needs to answer that, say it out loud. I don't have to say it out loud. I may be tricking you. What I say and what my mind is doing may be two completely different things. So we have to be really, really careful when we seek out a teacher. So we say, is this person motivated, have a good motivation for what they're doing? Are they a teacher? Okay, what does that establish, Well, are they teaching what the capital T teacher taught? Right? So if we're looking at this relying on a teacher in the Lam Rim Chemo, and we look at the points the Buddha makes, the Buddha says in the future, when I'm no longer in this world, the words in the texts, see as the Tathagata, see as the Buddha, right? And Geshe Aga said to me that when we read, the Buddha's texts, and we think about Lord Buddha, it's like the Buddha didn't exist 2,500 years ago. It's like so fresh almost, like, oh, it's almost like, wow, I knew him. You read enough about Buddha Shakyamuni and you read enough of the truth that Buddha Shakyamuni presented, and you know what the whole aim was. You start to feel like I can start to really feel like this Buddha Shakyamuni is very fresh in my mind. It's not something that's like George Washington. It doesn't seem fresh to me. It seems like a historical figure that occurred back then. I have like a picture of someone on a boat for some reason. When I think of George Washington, like some picture, I don't even know why right now. But it doesn't seem fresh. It's not in my mind like there was this being that was, it's not as fresh. But when we look at the words of the Buddha, it becomes very, very fresh. So when you're hearing the words come out of the teacher, is the Buddha fresh? Right? Is the person that's instructing you creating that freshness of the Buddha? Because the words are what the Buddha said. The words in the text is what he was speaking of. But now we'll say these words because these are the words coming from here. Do those sound like they're making the Buddha fresh? And then the Buddha said, in the future, I will come in the forms of teachers and abbots, lamas and abbots, right? So this will be my form. My form will be, in the form of teachers. So we look at all of this and we say, okay, Buddha Shakyamuni is not in this world right now, in the sense of a physical being walking around. Hi, I'm Buddha Shakyamuni. How are you? Emanating, certainly. We don't have the karma to necessarily see that. Could be emanating as anything needed to benefit sentient beings, right? So we have the texts we can rely on, we have the words we can rely on, and we have teachers teaching we can rely on. So then how do we check those teachers? Well, we see if they checked themselves. Did they do self-trial? Did they go through what was necessary in order to some degree establish it within their mind? And you have to decide what degree you need your teacher to have established it in their mind. There's so many texts and references. You have to decide, to what degree you think, and then understand that all appearances are deceptive, right? And we have to wonder what's coming from our own side. But we can't say, oh, we're hearing wrong Dharma from a teacher. It's completely wrong. It's just me, though. You have to use your brain, right? You don't just check out and say, oh, it's just so subtle, and it's just the naked awareness that I don't understand. And it's just this subtlety. There is this inherently existent I. It's just so subtle, I can't understand it. You have to be able to say, no. And then that doesn't concord with what the Buddha said. So we have to be smart students. It's like it's a kind of a hard thing, right? When it's not your culture, right? You have to start fresh, start from scratch. So it's you have to go by what I said last week. You have to use how would you go about finding, if you were hiring for a position at a job? Would you just pick anyone? Or would you find out why they'd be qualified for that position? You would, even a dishwasher. I've run restaurants. We call references on dishwashers, not putting down dishwashers. I'm just saying, I'm not talking about to teach physics, to do something menial. We would all agree that you should check, make sure that person, the last 10 jobs, didn't rob the place blind. Right? We're talking restaurant business, or that they showed up at least 4 times in a row. Maybe not 5. We're not going to have that high of a standard because we know the position that we're hiring for, right? So we know what we're hiring for. But if we're hiring for the position of somebody to be in charge of our spirituality that's going to affect us forever, not just in this life, and next life, and next life, and next life, that could make us not suffer forever, that could make us be happy forever, infinitely happy forever, that job description's a little bit more serious, right? But so many of us will just see a flyer. You saw a flyer, I'm a dishwasher. I saw a flyer, I'm a physics teacher. Would you just hire him to be a physics teacher at a university? Oh, I saw a flyer. It says he can do it. No, you'd see why they could do it. You'd see if they have experience doing it. You check them very carefully. Don't leave your brains at the door because this is Buddhism. Think because somebody has a name that must be great. I remember Rinpoche said something to me. He said a lot of things to me. There was one very, very high master who was known for being clairvoyant. He said, I started talking about fancy stuff with him, like clairvoyance and all these different levels of mind that you could get to. And he said, yeah, everybody says he has clairvoyance. And I know who this is, and everyone does. And then he said, but Jeff, I was really good friends with his attendant. He could never find his wallet. So Rinpoche was always saying, he didn't say, no, he doesn't have clairvoyance, but he's saying well, isn't that curious? And there are different levels of clairvoyance, right? So you could have clairvoyance. That's not a problem. But he's saying, oh, you just heard that? Do you know that he has such a clairvoyance? I know someone who is with him every day. He lost his wallet all the time. Don't be so quick to just be sure someone's a saint. Don't be so quick to be sure someone's a devil either. But be sure that there are those two. And that even if it's maybe coming from your dirty mind, all you can work from is your dirty mind. And you have to do the best with that mind you can and make the best decisions that you can that make logical sense based on the information that you have in front of you. So you check this, teachers. You check them very well. Find out where they studied. Find out how long they studied it. Did their teachers say they could teach? Did your teacher say they were qualified? I remember telling Rinpoche, he was here like 6 months. It's like, I'm going to run out. I'm going to Boston. I want to go see this teacher teach. Nowhere near as qualified as Rinpoche. Qualified, very qualified teacher, but nowhere near as qualified. And he just looked at me like, yeah, if that's what you think that makes the most sense. I've given you all these things to memorize. I had a bunch of jobs at that time to do for Rinpoche. All this stuff to memorize, all these things I've told you need to subdue your mind, all this stuff I think you should concentrate on. But if you think somebody less informed than me might have some new answers, you should definitely go. He said, you're independent. Go ahead. And I could tell he was like saying, you're independent, like, fool. But I just got mad, you know? And I was like, oh, he just doesn't want me to go see other teachers. It was very early. I used to get mad all the time at Rinpoche, you know? It didn't start like, oh, you know, I'm completely, you know, it didn't start like that. So, you know, my point to all of this is that I went, and no, I didn't hear anything that I hadn't heard before. It took 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to get back. You know, there was like a lot of like stuff that went on, a lot of gossip that went on during the time. On the way home, we talked about, oh man, I can't believe this person said that, and that person said this, and yeah, you know, the teacher was kind of like that, but oh, Rinpoche teaches it more like this, and realized when I got home, like, what am I doing? So my teacher said, sure, go, but I didn't use my own brain. I could tell there was a little hesitance in sure go, but I didn't use my own brain to discern. Okay, I have a teacher. They're completely qualified. He's a Larampa Geshe. He was the retired abbot of the Dalai Lama's monastery. He's considered one of the greatest scholars alive, considered by the Dalai Lama one of the greatest scholars alive. When the Dalai Lama ever has any time to speak with him, they talk about emptiness. So it's this caliber of being that I have, right? So what person with a high intelligence would say I should go seek something out that's less if I want to learn all the intricacies of Buddhism in the correct way? Should I go to someone who's not as reliable? We don't need the Lam Rim Chemo to think of things in that way. Geshe Dorje Damdu said, okay, what if, you know, and it doesn't matter who's nicer or who you feel better to be around. It's who can teach you the truth and get you out of cyclic existence quicker. Who can teach you the truth with a laser scope and can bring you to infinite happiness quicker because they have a laser scope. If you want to learn physics, right? So say you have two options. You can go to a physics teacher who gives you nice cake, but your only goal is to learn physics. You can go to two people's houses to learn physics. You go to your physics teacher. They're both physics teachers. It says right on their name, physics teacher, right? Joe Blow, physics teacher, and Sarah May, whatever. Sarah Smith, physics teacher, whatever. You know, there's two physics teachers. You know, and then let's say there's three physics teachers. There could be as many as you want. So the first two physics teachers you go to, Mary and Joe, whoever, right? They're really nice. Like, you know, you find they have great qualities. One you go to, they give you cakes. You know, they teach you a little physics, not bad. They give you some cakes. And another one you go to, man, they really compliment you. They tell you how great you are, how smart you are, make you feel so good about your wisdom. And then there's Albert Einstein. If you want to learn physics, and that's your main goal. Your main goal wasn't to have someone tell you nice things about yourself. Your main goal wasn't to eat cake. Your main goal was to figure out physics in this case. So why would you go to those other two people? You're wasting your time. Albert Einstein's right there. Why would you go to them? Unless you had an ulterior motive. A motive that wasn't really to learn physics. You just wanted some companionship. You wanted some cake. I think it's fun. But really, it's a lot of work to learn physics, right? It's not just going to be eating cake and people telling you you're smart. You're going to learn, whoa, my God, I don't understand any of this. And then you're going to get beaten down and feel like not so much confidence. And then the teacher will tell you more, and then you'll understand a little more and your confidence will increase. And you'll get to the point where you don't have any lack of confidence, because you will have learned physics flawlessly, because you were presented it flawlessly, and you put the effort in to know it flawlessly. So now you too are a physics teacher. You too are reliable. You too can present that in a reliable fashion, because you've realized it through the ultimate form of understanding it. The teacher has taught it to you in such a clear, perfect way that now you are reliable. Now you can teach it. The same way when we look for teachers. Did they go about it like that? Who were their teachers? And when you hear someone say, I've studied Buddhism for 30 years, how much during those 30 years? I've heard that so much. I've heard people say they've studied Buddhism for 30 or 40 years, and I guarantee you, you could not pass the 2-month certificate course that Geshe Dorje Damdu is putting on. You could not pass the test. The course is 2 months long. You've been studying 30 or 40 years. I challenge you to take that final exam. And it's only 6 hours or something a week, 7 hours a week for 2 months. You studied Buddhism 30 years. That's the thing. Okay, now you're looking for a teacher just because they've been around. I know a lot of people have been around forever. It's almost like groupies sometimes. Are you even studying? I swear. And I feel like it's not wrong to say this. Are you studying? Are you looking at these texts after we get off Zoom? You're very interested on a Sunday morning, on a Thursday night. Go see the Dalai Lama, all these different teachings. You see everybody at them. And then 10 years later, you try and have a conversation about Buddhism. Were we at the same place? Well, it's because it was just not for the reason of becoming a Buddha as quickly as possible. There were all these other reasons they showed up. But if your reason is to get rid of suffering altogether and to have infinite happiness, if that's the reason you're here, you better found out the right way to get it. You will not get it if there's something incomplete. And what these great teachers do so well is make sure that all of the paths presented are complete. Teata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhisoha. Not teata om gate gate bodhisoha. Not that, not incomplete. Teata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhisoha. That's complete. The path of accumulation to the path of preparation, path of seeing to the path of meditation, to the path of no more learning. It's not teata om gate gate bodhisoha. It's not the path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of no more learning. You have to do path of seeing and path of meditation. Any steps that are left out will not get you to the goal. If you don't have bodhicitta, you can't become a Buddha. If you don't have renunciation, You can't become free from fear. You can't get bodhicitta if you don't have renunciation. So we see how all of these things are necessary to be presented in a specific way. And what's the specific way? The way the Buddha taught them. And anything that is going left or right from what the Buddha taught isn't reliable. So the person teaching has to know what the Buddha taught to teach you what the Buddha taught. And what the Buddha taught was extremely complex. So that person will have had to investigate extremely complex things for an extremely long period of time to even start to become qualified. Qualified enough to be a parakeet, to pass on information. Then qualified enough to have had some experience with it, so that you could tell the person who's talking about it just isn't reading it, looking at it, some book. In the debate courtyard, when you're like, they say, what happened? Did you leave all your knowledge in your books? It's not acceptable. We have to know this stuff. We have to be able to talk about this stuff without picking up a book. We have to know what it means. We have to know what those stages of the path are. And if we want to know what those stages of the path are, we have to know the person telling us what they are knows what they are. And if they say, oh, well, you don't need to know all these things because that's just conceptuality. And the mind's concepts are what cause us to be in samsara. They don't know what they're talking about. Really, if they're just saying like there's some just awareness of emptiness that empties the mind altogether, uses no kind of analysis, doesn't need any studying. There's some natural thing waiting to pop out. You're already a Buddha, don't worry. You just got to pop out. You're going to pop out any minute. You're already a Buddha. Like this understanding just completely doesn't understand Buddha nature, doesn't understand the idea of the proliferating Buddha nature. Our mind is empty of true existence, and we have mental consciousness. Therefore, it can be proliferated. It can be matured. But you have to have someone who understands why and what that means if you're going to put your spiritual monopoly in their hands. That's all. Hey, you can go listen to lectures. I mean, I'm talking about the long run getting real serious, you know? You know, you're not going to destroy all of your spiritual growth if you are somewhere and hear a lecture that isn't right. But if you're making a decision to go to hear something, to go to do something, why don't you make the best decision possible to hear the most valuable information possible? To hear information that could actually transform your mind a little bit into the mind of a Buddha. Have some kind of cause that you're participating in for your Buddhahood. Because there's nothing missing there. There's nothing to get distracted by. There's no pothole that you can, pop your tire in and have to pull over, and change your tire and put a donut on and then drive like this. You can drive completely correct. You don't have those potholes if you're being presented with the proper information. The only potholes will be your issues with going through the information. But it won't be a pothole of missing information or incorrect information that causes your tire to break and makes you not go towards the place you're trying to go, or delays you in going to the place that you're trying to go. We don't need any delays. We've been delayed long enough. Prove it, we're here. We're born. Since beginningless time, we've been thrown over and over and over again into this contaminated aggregates because of our ignorance, a grasp at things as being truly established, and because of our self-cherishing attitude that rarely thinks of others. We've had this since beginningless time. There's no more time to waste. There's a lot of time to waste if you'd like to, but an intelligent person would say enough is enough. I've got this information in my hand right now. What do I do about it? Who has it to give me? Who can give it to me in the most refined format? Where are the books? What books should I be reading? And so forth. Likewise, if you're trying to figure out what books should I be reading, what are all these different points of information I should be looking at? And you're going to people and going to proper sources to see what they are. Wouldn't you do the same thing about a teacher? What teacher should I be listening to? You know, we're so fortunate because we just got, you know, thrown in the laps of Khensur Geshe Wangdak, right? We didn't have to do, you know, so much investigating. I got very lucky. You know, I didn't search the globe for a teacher. I searched a little bit of the globe, and then Rinpoche showed up, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. Well, it's not always that obvious. And just because somebody has this big title doesn't mean that they are who will mature your mind either. A lot of big titles have been in scandals. A lot of people that, oh my, it doesn't matter who they are, but 20 years ago, people thought were gods. Now you say their name and people go, ugh. And people, these names, no one was doing that 20 years ago. But what was interesting is they were talking quite abstract. They weren't pushing everyone to just use your brain and analyze, check me, check the Dharma, check everything. Maybe they were teaching the higher forms of Guru devotion, fooling their students, saying, you have to listen to everything that I say. I'm the Guru. I'm the Guru. Just do what I say and everything will be okay. Don't be fooled by that. The information is what you're seeking. Blessings, mysticism, fancy names, all this stuff. Our mind. It's the information, the wisdom that arises from hearing properly, analyzing it properly, and then having a direct perception of it. I mean, those are the stages of the awareness that will take place. So the information that you're getting, if it comes in and you understand it, and then you analyze it, and it's the wrong information, you're just spinning your tires, analyzing wrong information. And if you don't think you can do that, go pick up Jamyang Sheba's Tenets, the great presentation of tenets. It's this thick, somewhere around here, and flip through to, you know, maybe the Madhyamika Svatantrika view. Just start reading it and see if you could be convinced, and just start analyzing that that's the Prasangika view. You don't have somebody who can discern it for you. If somebody says, no, things have some kind of defining characteristic that's intrinsic, but they're, the parts coming together have some defining characteristics, but they don't inherently, the object doesn't inherently exist as a car, even though its parts come together, they have some defining characteristics that makes it possible for it to become a car. And then we just name it as car. So it takes the subject and the object both participating, and then it comes into being as a car. What if I taught you that that was the Madhyamika Prasangika view today? What if I told you that that was the view? I told you that everything comes from your mind. Here's another one. Everything comes from your mind. The Buddha even said it. You know, what creates the worlds, these different worlds of cyclic existence and so forth? The mind. So what if I told you that there's no external phenomena? It's only mind. Madhyamika Prasangika view says there's no external phenomena. There's only mind. The mind is, there's no external. And I told you that's a Prasangika view. What could happen? Well, then you hear it and you go, okay, well, Jeff said today that there's no external phenomena, and that's the Madhyamika Prasangika view. Now let me analyze it. Let me meditate on that. Let me meditate that that's the final view. Now, if you're doing it well, you may eventually be able to come up with doubts, right? But you would more than likely spend an enormous amount of time thinking something's the final view that's not. And not have any frame of reference to prove otherwise, unless you looked at a really complex book. But if you just went by what I was saying, you could be thrown down a wrong road so easily. Sakyapandita said that most Mahamudra meditations done by those who aren't realized cause rebirth as an animal. because we're just spacing out. We're just looking at the mind and the emptiness of the mind and emptying the mind. And it's like almost a nihilistic meditation if we're not understanding the object of negation, what we're negating the existence of when we're looking at the Mahamudra meditation. What's the object of negation? So, therefore, it's quite important then that the person who is talking to you knows what they're talking about the subject matter they're talking about, and that they're qualified to do so. So that's really the main point. Now we'll get into the technical details about this. But if we're expecting, we became a Buddhist because we felt that what Buddha Shakyamuni, hopefully, because the Buddha said, don't do so unless you did. We became a Buddhist because we thought that what Buddha Shakyamuni presented was the ultimate truth, right? And we believe that Buddha Shakyamuni has the ultimate truth because we analyzed it and we thought from our side. Is the reason I think this is the case. Not because we were mad at other religions and this one seemed cool, because we established that Buddha was the reliable guide, was the teacher, because he's gone to bliss, so he's a protector. Same thing as a teacher, as the teacher without the capital T, our teachers. When we look to learn Buddhism, if Buddha Shakyamuni is not in this world, how do we know if they're a good guide? Well, are they presenting that which Buddha Shakyamuni presented with a good motivation? Very basic. You don't have to get into a million categories for that. So anyway, and we're so lucky. Again, I just want to rejoice in the fact that we had Khensur Geshe Wangdak for 25 years, some of us in our lives, to be able to watch and to be able to see what a true practitioner does in their lives, and be able to look at his biography and see, look, so let's do real quickly an exercise. Okay. Why would we study with Khensur Geshe Wangdak before he passed, before he went to, nirvana, or however you want to call it, before he, passed? We'll just call it transitioned. You can use many different words. There's like, in Tibetan, if you say just died, it's really rude. So I'm trying to, dance around to try to figure out how to not be rude in the English as well. But so passed on. Nyanyenle Depa, it's like passed to beyond sorrow. But there was no sorrow in Rinpoche's case. So Rinpoche passed from what we could see in front of us into another form. But why was he qualified? Okay, so Khensur Geshe Wangdak became ordained when he was, before he was even 10 years old. He started studying and was recognized as such a genius in his village. He was considered someone who kind of almost like the case of Buddha Shakyamuni, he outgrew his own teachers in his local village. And then everyone said you should go to Drepung Losaling, to the main monastic university. The Dalai Lama went to Drepung Losaling and was in Drepung at that time, also as Namgyal, but Dalai Lama's studied at Drepung. So then Rinpoche gets sent to Drepung, where he's considered one of the top scholars. He's debating the logic, the collected topics, and the mind and awareness, and signs and reasoning, the Dutra Lorig and Darig. And then he's looking at the valid cognition, the Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika Karika, the commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognition, which is a commentary on Dignaga's Compendium of Valid Cognition that this quote, two-line quote, came from. So Rinpoche studied and studied and studied that. Then he got into the perfection of wisdom teachings and studied. And then Mao Zedong invaded, and China invaded Tibet. Bombs started dropping. So bombs start dropping. Everyone is terrified. But really, the great practitioners were terrified of what? They were terrified of losing their opportunity for studying more. They weren't satisfied with partial instructions. Some maybe were. But you see that Khensur Geshe Wangdak wasn't, because he walked with bombs dropping out of Tibet, got to India, and then lived in what was a British prison camp called Buxa for a decade. And what did they do in Buxa for a decade? They established a makeshift monastery with all the traditions of Buddhism, because there were refugees from Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, Galut, nuns, monks. So they established kind of a one place where everyone could study. And then Khensur Pema Jetsun was there, and Dzong Rinpoche was there. Many great scholars were there. I shouldn't say that. Not that many great scholars were there, but the ones who were there were the greatest scholars, and they were so dedicated to keeping the tradition alive. Why? Because it's the only thing they believed, because of analysis, that could bring complete fearlessness and infinite happiness. So for 10 years, Khensur Geshe Wangdak studied in a British prison camp. Studied and studied and studied and memorized. He said, oh, it was wonderful there. It was wonderful there. I've heard other accounts from so many monks. It was terrible. At first they had food, then they didn't have food. Some of them had to go work out on the roads. It was not wonderful. He said, it was wonderful. I did so much of my studies there. I got so much studying done there. Imagine this kind of thinking from a being. Then they tell them, okay, you're going to South India now, where we're going to reestablish all the monasteries. And wait till you get there. Let me tell you, it's going to be super fun, super fancy. There's all these people with faith there. There'll be trumpets, basically is what they're selling, blowing, and parades when you get to South India, to this place we're going to reestablish all these monasteries. They leave the British prison camp, where their, resources weren't always good. They didn't always have food. And then they get to South India, to where they're going to eventually be Drepung and Ganden, and then Sarah went down to Mysore. And there's nothing there. Fields with stumps. They've cut some trees down to be able to start making this wonderful place. There's no parade. None of that. There's cobras, pigs, wild boars, elephants. There's all these different, wildlife that we couldn't even imagine having to protect ourselves from, and no buildings. So now they make tents. Now they're in the jungle in South India, clearing land and trying to learn how to become farmers while they're still studying. Do they just become farmers and become builders because they need to build a monastery and they need to learn to farm and clear land? No. They become farmers and they become builders, and they continue to study day and night whenever they have a chance. Rinpoche said they'd be guarding the corn because the boars would come and just, uproot the corn. And they'd be out there and they'd be, trying to study, their texts, and trying to keep memorizing the texts as they were doing it, all night, staying up and trying to, make sure that the boars didn't come and take their corn crop. But they knew that the corn crop and the eating wasn't going to be able to free them from suffering forever and give them infinite happiness. No matter how beautiful a building they built, no. The continuation of the studies was all that would do it. So then Rinpoche stayed in Varanasi for a period of time at Sanskrit University and taught and learned. And then in the late 70s, he got his Geshe degree. He went and took his examination. So, you look at the years of study. He's born in 1932 or 34, depending on which document you look at. Now it's 19. So call it 44 if you want, because 10 years, right? He becomes 10 and starts studying. That's all he wanted to do. He told his family, I just want to be a monk. I just want to study. That was his aim. So from then until 1977, he studied the 5 great texts day in and day out, no matter what was going on. farming, in a prison, having to escape Tibet, having to walk from his local village for 3 months to the main monastery. No matter what was going on, whether he was walking, whether he was working, whatever he was doing, he was studying more because he knew that that was what was going to be necessary to have freedom from suffering, infinite happiness, and be able to be a reliable guide. So then he's asked by His Holiness after his Geshe exam, right afterwards, to become a senior teacher at his monastery. By now, Rinpoche is famous in the world of Tibetan Buddhism, by now, at this point, in the late 70s. He's considered the highest scholar of Madhyamika around. There's others who would say, well, no, he is, but there's only a few of them. And the Dalai Lama is so incredibly impressed by his level of understanding. So incredibly impressed that the Dalai Lama says, I want you to be the senior teacher at my university, and I need you to do me a favor. We're mostly, these days, I feel, involved with rituals, memorization, and so forth. There's not enough curriculum. There's not enough study of the 5 great texts like there is in South India. I want you to help with that. So the Dalai Lama told Khensur Geshe Wangdak that he should help with making the curriculum more of that of the great texts. So the Dalai Lama considered Khensur Geshe Wangdak someone who could do that. So we're establishing qualifications, right? He studied all these years. Then the Dalai Lama appoints him as this. The Dalai Lama considers him someone who can present all this information. And then Rinpoche, from the late 70s to 1993 or 4, teaches 7 classes a day. 7 days a week. 7 classes a day. And they were all like an hour and a half or 2 long. You imagine this, like, okay, next class, and they're all at different levels and different topics. It's not like he's teaching the same thing over and over again. It's not like he's a bio, professor. He's teaching all of the texts. He's teaching the logic primer to some, and low rig to some, and he's teaching, mind and awareness to some, and perfection of wisdom to some, and middle way view to some. He's teaching all these varieties of teaching, 7 days a week. And then the Dalai Lama says, after he gets, long story, goes to Tibet for a year, and comes back. Dalai Lama says, now I want you to go to Ithaca, New York, and be the head of my North American seat. And Rinpoche goes, and he's the head of the North American seat for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Then Rinpoche does some touring, comes to our little center where there's 5 or 6 students, and we get a phone call. Maybe there's 10, but there's really 4 or 5 students at this time. We get a phone call that says, hey, this great teacher feels some connection and wants to retire at your center. We weren't requesting a teacher. I'm sure in our minds, that's what we really wanted, but we weren't saying, hey, we need to have someone move in here right away. We didn't have money. We didn't have any of these things. And then the Dalai Lama says, yes, I give you permission to go to the Chenrezig Center, retire, and teach. I just request that you continue to teach, and that when you come to India, sometimes you teach the monks still. So I don't know how many more stamps we would need, right? So we're watching this. We're seeing a teacher getting qualified. And then what would be the final stamp we would need, right? You ask around about Rinpoche. Ask his students in India. You talk to him. There's no one that spent any amount of significant time with Rinpoche that won't say this. He's so simple. He doesn't care about anything. He isn't even like, he'll have on like just pajama robe underneath. And he'll look like this real simple person to not be taken seriously. And he's one of the greatest yogis in the world. They would all concur on this. I've heard this so many times. Comes off as so simple and just so loving and caring, but he's really one of the most sharpest scholars, greatest yogis in the world. And then we, can interview students and hear that. And then for 25 years, I've been able to watch Khensur Geshe Wangdak. I've been able to watch what he cared about. And anything that didn't cause freedom from fear and infinite happiness was not something Rinpoche was invested in. He was only invested in freedom from fear and infinite happiness for himself and others. I watched everything he did, kind of like a fly on the wall, and then, a fly in the room or whatever. Watched everything he did. In the beginning, I was with him all the time, going here, going there, going here, going there. And then through the middle of our relationship, translating, and coming every Sunday and then Wednesdays and touring and seeing, like, every time I show up, it's just this same exact being. There's no tonal difference. It's the same being. And they're always trying to accomplish the same thing. Get something into this head. Get some truth into this head. Every time I'd see Rinpoche, he was never cared about anything but getting truth into my head, maybe making me feel comfortable enough to be open to get truth into my head, but was only concerned with that. So we have the ultimate example of a teacher, right? So we can use that as a really perfect guideline frame of reference. But then we also have to understand, as it says in the Lam Rim Chemo, that this is a very degenerate time. And finding someone who is as perfect as Rinpoche was, with all of those qualifications, is quite a tall feat. And being able to connect regularly with a being like that is quite a small feat. So we have to use our discretion when we're approaching teachers. Very, very good student I know of said that, I can say one thing about Khensur Geshe Wangdak, and that's that he never told me something that wasn't true. He never, he always gave me the truth no matter what. And I can't say that for all my teachers, but all my teachers I respect so greatly. So we have had such a pure being teach us, but our learning can't stop, right? And we need to be able to ask questions when we have doubts. We need to be able to clarify our own misperceptions. Because even though we were told something pure truth, when we start to analyze it, we can turn the Madhyamika Prasangika view into the mind-only school in our mind, even though we heard it correctly. We can change it into something wrong, and that's why we need someone to ask and to check with. So we can't just give up. So what do? So we look for this teacher who has the 10 qualities of that Lord Maitreya talks about. So when we go to the Lam Rim Chemo and we get to this section of how to lead students with the actual instructions, the fourth division of the major outline of the Lam Rim Chemo, we see the first is to how to rely on the teacher that's the root of the path. And then it gets into an elaborate explanation of how you develop certain knowledge about what, certain knowledge that the teacher is the root of the path. You become certain that the teacher is the root of the path, and that you become certain that all of the realizations, all of the forbearances, all of the perfections, all of the levels, all of the concentrations, according to the scriptural collection of the Bodhisattvas, come from properly relying on a teacher. So this is what we're trying to develop certain knowledge about. So then we define what a teacher is. So last week we went over the 10 qualities found in the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara by Maitreya, seeing that we have rely on a Mahayana teacher who is disciplined, serene, thoroughly pacified, has good qualities surpassing those of the students, is energetic, has a wealth of scriptural knowledge, possesses loving concern, has thorough knowledge of reality and a skill in instructing disciples, and is abandoned dispiritedness. So we went over this pretty clearly, no need to go into great detail. So these first three, disciplined, serene, and thoroughly pacified, refer to the three higher trainings, higher training in ethics, concentration, and wisdom, and then has good qualities surpassing those of the students. So meaning that you would want a teacher who has more qualities than you do, right? You don't want to rely on someone who is inferior because you will degenerate. It says in the verses about friends, you don't want to rely on someone who's equal because you'll remain the same. You need to rely on someone who's superior so you can attain that excellence. You're looking for something excellent you don't have. You need to find someone who's excellent, who has it, who can show you how to become excellent. So it's very, very important that you find someone who has those good qualities that surpass those of your own. It doesn't mean that every quality you don't have any qualities that are better than theirs. It just means that we're talking about a teacher who's teaching, and that when you look at what a good quality is according to what we learn about the Dharma, do those qualities surpass those of yours? Is energetic, has energy in giving the teaching, isn't glum, doesn't not want to give it, is willing to come and show up and give the teaching, willing to answer your questions, willing to just be engaged, just willing to have energy, has a wealth of scriptural knowledge. Do they know their stuff or don't they? Can they quote things? Do they know where things fall into perspective? What's the profound view? What's the extensive deeds view? What's Tantra? What's the difference between Mahayana and Hinayana? What's the difference between the perfection vehicle and the tantric vehicle? Can they differentiate those things? Through scripture? Through understanding it? Do they know what the baskets refer to? Abhidharma Sutra and Vinaya basket? Is there any understanding of those things? Do they have a wealth of scriptural knowledge about those three baskets? The wisdom basket, the things about concentration, and the things about ethics. They have that understanding. Those are the questions. And then, of course, the three higher trainings also align with the baskets. The highest higher training in ethics aligns with the Vinaya basket. The highest higher training in concentration aligns with the Sutra basket. The highest higher training in wisdom aligns with the Abhidharma basket. But, do they have a wealth of scriptural knowledge? Do they know their stuff? Do they possess loving concern? Do they care about the students? They have a concern for the students, or is there some other agenda? We talked about that. Has thorough knowledge of reality. Best case scenario, they've seen emptiness. Second best case scenario is that they have an intellectual understanding of emptiness and can cite it and understand it through scripture and reasoning. But best would be if they saw emptiness directly. But they should have a deep understanding of it that comes about through knowledge, basically, through scripture and reasoning. So that's sufficient. But best case scenario is someone who's seen emptiness directly. Then skill in instructing disciples, pretty self-explanatory. Has a skill in teaching, can convey information and get it to you. So many teachers you've heard who can be like 17 divisions of this and 36 divisions of that, and 74, 32, 33, and then the definition of this is that. Like, someone who's teaching like that isn't necessarily skilled at teaching, right? Because they're just you're not information, just because you can give information out, blah, 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 give it out, doesn't mean you're skilled. If you're skilled in giving it out, it means the people who are hearing it are getting something from it. You're keeping their attention. They're getting something from it. They're not just doing a bid. They're not just doing a 2-hour bid with Jeff. Like, I could do that standing on my head. But no, they're paying attention. Their minds are being affected because you are teaching it in a way that is causing the attention to be grabbed. So are you skilled? And have you abandoned dispiritedness? And I've seen, this is the one thing I just think of Rinpoche like instantly when I think of that. Can they tell the same thing over and over again without being discouraged that they've already said it? If someone asks a question that they should know the answer of, that I'm in the room going, why don't they know the answer to this? I'm making a face. Rinpoche is so excited that he gets to give an answer. He's given 1,000,000 times because it might just be that time they get it. There isn't any kind of, oh God, I can't believe they don't know this. They're these lamas, you're so excited that you've asked a question and you don't know the answer to it. They're not thinking, wow, I told them this so many times. They're thinking, they asked a question they don't know the answer to, so now I can give them the answer and their ignorance will be cleared up. So that's the abandonment of dispiritedness. They'll say it over and over again because they have loving concern. And they know that it's only the truth that can free that student from their suffering and give them infinite happiness. So their goal is to get the truth into their mind. If they don't have the truth and they ask the question, a true teacher is excited that they can get rid of some ignorance for a student. We've been ignorant since beginningless time. Why would you as a teacher be upset that someone asked that they should have known the answer to? We've been told these things a million times. Prove it. We're meeting with it again. We're meeting with the untangling information. Untangling what? The untangling of, since beginningless time, we've thought about everything incorrectly. We've been told the right thing. We just didn't believe it or didn't analyze it enough, or turned the angel into a devil with our own analysis. Turned right view into wrong view with our own distorted mind. Right? So we've done this over and over and over again. Okay, so let me not get too buried in the weeds here. So I don't mean to jump, but I'm going to jump. So these are these qualities that we can check and see, are the people we're listening to, is the teacher that I'm going to study with, do they have all of these qualities? Do they have some of these qualities? We start to ask ourselves these questions. So what are some other qualities, that a teacher could have? How can we reconcile that the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara says that a teacher should have these 10 qualities if we're looking for a teacher? That's best case scenario that they have these 10 qualities. So just trying to decide how deep into the detail we'll go. So we find another point that's made in the Tantra requested by Sabahu. There are more qualities that are presented. So in the Lam Rim Chemo, it says, question, because this is a degenerate time, it's what I was referencing before, it is difficult to find a teacher who has these qualities in their entirety. So the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara presents these 10 qualities. And it's saying, good luck. The person's using their critical analysis, says, I know the Buddha said these are degenerate times. Beings, for the most part, are involved in ignoble, according to Aryadeva's 400 verses. How will I find this teacher that's so perfect? And should I just wait around until my next life for them? So it says, because of this degenerate time, it's difficult to find a teacher who has these good qualities in their entirety. Therefore, what should we do if we don't find such a teacher? Give up? So then it says, the Buddha is so smart and always gives us exactly what we need to know in order to use our own critical analysis. Just as a chariot with one wheel will not go down the path even though it has a horse, so too without assistance from meditation, people will not gain attainments. These assistants should have intelligence, a good appearance, great purity, be of reputable lineage, inclined towards the teachings. They should have great confidence, perseverance, have disciplined the senses. They should speak pleasantly, be generous and compassionate, forbear hunger and thirst and the afflictions, and not worship other deities and Brahmins. They should be focused, adept, grateful, and have faith in the three jewels. Since those who have all such good qualities are very rare in this age of strife, mantra practitioners should rely on an assistant who has 1/2, 1/4, or 1/8 of these qualities. Thus, it says that assistants should have these defining characteristics in their entirety, or at least 1/8 of these. It is explained in Dua's arrangement of Botawa's method of explaining that the great elder Atisha said. It's also the same with respect to the guru. So here it's talking about spiritual friends, companions in your quest, right? So Atisha says, what they're talking, the Tantra requested by Sabahu is speaking of when it's speaking of assistance. Here it says we can talk about this in terms of the guru as well, and say that we can accept the guru if they have a minimum of an eighth of all the defining characteristics set forth here, combining those that are easy to acquire with those that are difficult to acquire. So don't just look for the easiest one, right? And say, okay, yeah, that's the one. You're not trying to get out of having a good teacher. You're saying, in this degenerate time, I'm searching everywhere. I can't find this perfect teacher. Now I've narrowed it down to 10. Okay, now let me, now I've got a job I'm interviewing for. I've got 10 teachers. I'm interviewing them for the job of being my teacher. Now I use this Mahayana Sutra Alamkara and those 10 qualities. I look at those, and then I use these qualities presented in the Tantra requested by Sabahu. And I say, okay, do any of those 10 have all 10 qualities and all the qualities presented in the Tantra requested by Sabahu? Did any of those 10 have them? And then you say, okay, maybe they do or they don't. If they do, then if one of them does, then pick that one. If two of them do, pick both of them. But if one of them does, pick that one. But if none of them do, start refining your search results. Start refining it. Okay, so I'm looking for a teacher who has these things, who has that thing, who has that thing. And then you start tallying it up, like a scale. Putting the teacher on the scale. Okay, they've got this quality, but they got that bad quality, this quality, that quality, that quality, that quality. See how many pile up on the good one. See how many pile up on the bad one. Right? Look at all 10. You can start to narrow your search. Oh, no. That one's got 1. That guy's got 8. Or that she has 10. Right? So you start to narrow your search based on the mirror of the Dharma. It's always the mirror of the Dharma, because we don't know. We need the capital teacher T to explain it to us. And we believe they're explaining it to us correctly because we've established from our own side through cutting and rubbing the gold that it's gold, that teacher has a capital T. We've established that. So we use the advice that teacher with a capital T gave in order to find a teacher that could represent that teacher with a capital T in the best way. So that's all we're doing. We're refining our search, refining it, using the mirror of the qualifications of the teacher that are found in the Dharma for us. Oh, okay, that's what it says. Okay, that's the kind of teacher I'm looking for. They need to have that. And then you say, okay, they need to have that. They need to have that. And then you look outward and you say, do they have that? Do they have that? Do they have that? Do they have that? And then you make the best decision possible based on what you have in your realm at that time. You make your best decision possible. And within some real specific framework that you are setting forward. So I don't mean to make it seem like, most people shouldn't be teaching. There's so many qualified teachers, lay teachers, ordained teachers, teachers in the Kaju Nyingma Sakya Galut, right? Teachers in Sri Lanka, teachers in Indonesia, teachers in Burma, teachers in Thailand, teachers in Nepal, teachers in Mongolia. There's qualified teachers everywhere. But what all of those traditions have in common is that if they want to know what a qualified teacher is, they just check with Buddha. And if the traditions aren't checking with Buddha to see what a qualified teacher is, and aren't weighing it in that way, then they don't know what a qualified teacher is, because they're not looking at it through what the real qualified teacher, who is their teacher with a capital T, said. So that's why critical analysis is so important. Just the name Buddhism, just the name teacher, just the name Rinpoche, just the name monk, just the name nun, just the name layperson, just the way someone's dressed, just the fancy clothes or not fancy clothes. None of these things are the qualifications. The qualifications are whether or not they have the information in a flawless fashion or not. I mean, it's so, so important that they don't have a bad motive and they know what they're talking about. So, so important. And so in these degenerate times, if we know the Buddha said it's degenerate times and most people are involved in the ignoble, why would we just go to anyone? We're involved in the ignoble. We know how to do that. And if most people are, does that mean most teachers aren't? Teachers aren't people? The subject teacher isn't a person? Aren't people? Arya Deva's only talking about non-teacher persons, non-teacher people? So if most beings are involved in the ignoble, then we can assume if a teacher is a being, then most teachers are involved in the ignoble. So therefore, most ordinary beings fall to the lower realms. And if we don't want to fall to the lower realms, right, we need to try to find the most qualified, noble teacher we can. A true reliable guide, a true protector. So that's it. Anybody have any questions this week? So I think maybe too, in the future, we can make a discussion group, because to see the people who would want to then now have me say, okay, so-and-so, what did I say about this? What did I say about that? Because I'm finding that in terms of learning, this is a new way of class, a new Buddhism class I'm taking. And that's the way that this instructor presents it. He makes everyone have their cameras on. He makes you make sure you're engaged all the time. Makes you raise your hand. How many agree with me? Raise your hand. How many disagree with me? You know, and then he says things that are wrong and say, how many agree with her? And he raises his hand and smiles about things that are wrong to see if people are listening. He agrees with things that are wrong to see if people are listening all the time. And then he asks questions. He says, oh, okay, so-and-so, what did I just say? What did I say about that? Well, why would it be like that? And not in a judgmental way, just in a way to find out if we know what we're talking about, not to try to embarrass anybody. Nobody comes in here knowing this stuff. This stuff's highly technical. So in the future, I have sorted out, but maybe we'll make a class that's just a class that bounces off the two classes, and it's more of a quick, what do you think of this? What about that? And then you fire back, and then, you know, it's more like debate. Because I really, really feel that the flow of debate and the language of debate and the ability that debate gives you to frame a question very, very purely and to give an answer very purely without being like, well, I think it's because of this and that. You already lost me. What's the answer? That's how the Geshes, that's when they debate how it goes. The subject this is that because of that. Yes or no? Yes. Oh, well, what about this? Well, it's not necessarily that. Okay, you're wrong there. Next. You know, it's showing consequences, right? That allow a student to so quickly be able to come to the realization of what the teacher is presenting themselves, which then once your mind gets embarrassed by a consequence to your illogical thinking, you don't forget it. Like, oh man, all colors are red. Oh, yellow color's red? You'll never forget that all colors are not red. Because you'll be like, yeah, all colors are red, yellow. Oh yeah, there's yellow. Right? So that consequence immediately makes your mind illuminate. If you were to say to me, all colors are blue, and then I say, oh, the yellow color of car is blue. You say, oh no, all I had to do is say that, and your mind just went, all colors aren't blue. I didn't even tell you all colors aren't blue. I didn't say that. I said, oh, right? Red's blue. So it's amazing when you know how to use the tools to make the mind evolve quicker, how quickly it evolves. And that's what Lobsang Dunyu is working really hard in India right now at Chenrezig Monastery to become a Larampa #1 Geshe. I put that out there. He'll become a Larampa Geshe. And he's really trying hard because he sees how debate is such a key to fast tracking understanding Buddhism and fast tracking you to the point where you know you don't understand Buddhism. You have all this like pride and confidence, which is unfounded. Buddha's debate will quickly tear that down and then will quickly get you on track. That's what's so amazing about it. It embarrasses our mind so quickly that it makes our mind be like, I'm gonna know, I wanna know. You know, because our minds don't like to be in that state because of our prides and our ego of non-knowing. So it works with, in a way, our dirty minds. Debate really works with our egos in some ways. And when we don't feel comfortable about knowing, our minds are like panicking, trying to know. And that's what debate's so beautiful for, because it kind of works at first with your ego. With the good, not good part of your ego, you know, that just gets panicky about not knowing something. It forces you into knowing and gets panicky because, oh my God, that's the consequence to that I don't know, and panics when you start to lose hold of a subject you think you know so much about. And that what that panicking does is it lets you let go of your mistaken ideas and then look at it again and be able to then see it correctly. Because that panic just tore apart all of the thing you thought was right. That moment of panic just dissolved all of that, you know, preconceived idea. And now you're standing there like, oh, right? Deflated. And now you can blow yourself up. And if you blow yourself up properly, you won't deflate. So when you deflated, it was proven you had not properly blown yourself up. That's what this logic and analysis can do. Yes, Melinda.
Okay, so Losang and some other people last winter taught an online debate class with a whole lot of paperwork, or things you can look at, and training exercises, because actually learning to debate with take the subject, a blue light. It follows that blue is a color or something like that. It's actually kind of hard to do. So I'm wondering if maybe on the Buddhist Center site, we could put up the, the stuff that Losang and his collaborators created to teach debate.
Yeah, probably. I need to look it over, but yeah, okay. For sure.
Because you're talking about, it's debating is good, but it's actually hard to do correctly. And it does all the things you said, it's really useful. But so this way, all of us, all of the, the students here can, look at how, the official way it's done with exercises and everything to help them be able to do it in an effective way.
I think it's a great idea. If you have to be able to present a syllogism, the Chuchen Sewa Dak, it's called, the subject, thesis, and reason, right? And then your answers are very specific. Right? Yeah, no, the answers are very specific. So I think it's a great idea.
It's just to
have a link to that.
Could look at.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree.
I'll ask I'll double check with Losang, but I'm sure he'd be very happy. His goal is helping more people learn using the debate process.
Yes. No, I know he's super invested in that, and he's very intelligent and has a great way, a good command of the lexicon, and a great way of presenting things. So yeah, let me think about the best way to do that as a link, or if maybe he comes on and does an introductory discussion about it. He can do that from India. He can get on Zoom. So we could possibly do it that way too. But let me put my thinking cap on around that. I think it's a great idea
Well, thank you, Jeff.
yeah, and it's for the folks that would be interested in that. So my only hesitance is that if half the people are using that kind of lexicon and that language, and then I start using it, then the other half maybe get lost a little bit. So I'm trying to figure out how, as a community, right, we could, as a group on this Sunday, be headed in that direction. So when we start to use these technical terms that half the people maybe know because they've, taken that course, and half the people don't, that there isn't that discrepancy somehow or another. So let me think about it. But I love the idea of bringing more information into this context. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Melinda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Stephanie.
I really like the idea you're talking about. And with this discussion group, I don't know if there's space for it or if it's appropriate, but I would be interested in conversations about how to be of the world with all of this stuff, because there's definitely there's the practices, but then there's also going to work or going to the grocery store or being a parent and trying to figure out how all of this connects, and how to take the lessons of the bodhicitta and then put them into very real context of trying to figure out how to move through the world. Because I think a lot of this, I can totally see how it makes sense if I were living in a monastery, but then I go out and get affronted by all of the things that are in our world, and it's just making those connections would be very interesting to me, if appropriate. Yeah.
Oh, very, very appropriate. That's the only reason we're doing any of this. And the Dalai Lama always says, is a true yogi can enter the highest levels of meditative realization standing in Times Square. Whereas someone not realized can go isolate themselves and put themselves in a cave, like a squirrel being in the forest alone, and realize nothing. So this is about how do we apply it to our personal lives? How do we become a better human being? How do we become a better parent, sister, son, daughter, et cetera, et cetera? Because a byproduct of our practicing these things should be that, right? So that's great. That's really why we're doing this, is to be able to apply it to our lives. We're looking for a teacher to be able to make us a better human being. So thank you for that. Thank you. Yes, Priscilla.
Addressing this to Melinda about Buddhist teachings in the future. I've had a lot of experience with designing and marketing similar type teaching programs. It really doesn't matter what the subject is. I'm talking about the structure, the underlying structure and the process. So Melinda, I would be very willing to provide whatever kind of help I can to get this organized in a way that it can be successful.
Thank you, Priscilla. I just want to say I didn't want to impose this process on anyone, but I thought since Jeff was talking about debate a bunch, it would be useful to have it at least available for people to look at. It's
Yes.
in a form, I think, though, but I'll get back to you about that, okay?
Well, whatever needs to be done in there needs to be an underlying structure. You can't just jump in and do it. Any of this stuff, there needs to be underlying organization, and that's something where I have a lot of experience. So whatever you want to do,
Okay.
call on me.
I'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's wonderful that they put that curriculum together and put on that debate course. And then this summer, they're doing it live in person for a month, which is so amazing. I've been following it a little bit, or maybe even started. I know the dates are coming up for the in-person live debate training at Sarah J in South India. that kind of piggybacked off of this first course that people were able to take online. So it's really, really wonderful. And debate, you so need people to debate with, to really learn debate. It's very hard to learn debate on your own, in a room, studying the course in Tibetan Buddhist debate in Tibetan Buddhism. It's very hard. I had studied all those texts. And then when I got to South India and started debating it, and started debating Dudra and Lorig, I saw how it was just such an engaged tradition that really required the active engagement and participation with more than one person. Very hard to learn it because it's so dry and doesn't make sense until you're really applying it and doing it. So yeah, that's what I need to think more about, how we would not make it just something people are off on their own trying to figure out, how we could then integrate it into an actual practice together. Because debate infers you're debating someone. Yeah, I can use them in my head to try to analyze, but when we're debating, we're using the person participating with us to try to keep our minds ignited and try to work through these things to figure out what we know and we don't know. And that opponent, as it's called, of debate is so crucial. And the person questioning you, if you're the opponent, is so crucial. So we'll work that out and think about that a little bit. I'm not going to be hasty about it because I don't want anyone to get confused. And I want it to be something that makes sense. If we do something, I don't want to just start doing things, right? Oh, that makes sense. And oh, I could also, I'm taking all these courses. I could, start putting all of Geshe Dorje Damdu's teachings up, and I could put, so I'm thinking of doing that as well, but I'm just trying to figure out like what makes the most sense for a Buddhist center and how we can not confuse folks and how we can keep things in kind of a very, very straight line of education whilst not leaving anything out and while bringing in people who are more qualified than myself in certain areas. And for debate, Labsang Dunyu would fall into that category. So thank you again. Concluding prayers. Thank you, everyone, for giving me another opportunity to move closer to becoming a Buddha. I appreciate that. You all did that, so thank you. I really do appreciate that. 8 verses of Training the Mind by Geshe Langri Tamba. With the determination to accomplish the highest welfare of all sentient beings who surpass even a wish-granting jewel, I will learn to hold them supremely dear. Whenever I associate with others, I will learn to think of myself as the lowest amongst all and respectively hold others to be supreme from the very depths of my heart. In all actions, I will learn to search into my mind, and as soon as a disturbing emotion arises, endangering myself and others, I will firmly face and avert it. I will learn to cherish ill-natured beings and those oppressed by strong misdeeds and sufferings as if I had found a precious treasure difficult to find. When others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, slander, and so on, I will learn to take all loss and offer victory to them. When the one whom I have benefited with great hope unreasonably hurts me very badly, I will learn to view that person as an excellent spiritual guide. In short, I will learn to offer to everyone without exception, with all help and happiness, directly and indirectly, and respectively take upon myself all the harm and suffering of my mothers. I will learn to keep all these practices undefiled by the stains of the 8 worldly concerns, and by understanding all phenomena as like illusions, be released from the bondage of attachment. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I've collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land, surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness, all-powerful Avalokiteshvara. Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray that we may never be separated from Khensur Geshe Wangdak. In all of our lives, may we meet with him or her in whatever emanation he or she chooses to show us through the Dharmakaya. May we meet with Khensur Geshe Wangdak in the emanation body and the enjoyment body when we are capable of doing so, and may we always create the merit and engage in learning so that we have the conditions to meet with such holy being. Thank you so much, everyone. I really, really enjoy talking about Dharma so much. I could go, I just was at a 5-hour Dharma class, just did a 2-hour. I literally could keep going until 6 o'clock tonight. And I'm not kidding. I could just keep going right now. And I had to put my feet down because they've been crossed for too many hours. But, you know, I could keep going because that's how much I know this information is accurate and how much excitement I get when I start to really get into it, because I believe that it can end fear and can create eternal happiness for us. And so I just want to thank you for allowing me to do something on a Sunday that I truly enjoy and that is truly helpful, that will help me to become fearless, be eternally happy, and have the power to help others. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Hopefully, when we see everyone next Thursday, we'll all be here, and that we'll have become better because of what we heard today. We'll become better beings. We'll become more like Khensur Geshe Wangdak. Not Khensur Geshe Wangdak, more like in the sense that, oh, we'll have robes on. Be great if we did, but more of the being that he was. The Khensur Geshe Wangdak if he was a parent. Khensur Geshe Wangdak if he was working in a restaurant. Khensur Geshe Wangdak, the version of Khensur Geshe Wangdak if you imagined him working in an office. How would he act? Hopefully we're more like that by next Thursday. And if we're not, then we'll try to be more like that by next Sunday. We do the best that we can. We don't get discouraged with ourselves. Since beginningless time, we've been a mess. It's going to take a long time to untangle that mess, but we have to keep going, As long as we keep walking, we'll get there, right? If we stop, we're not going to get to where we're going. But as long as we keep walking, even though we're walking slow sometimes, maybe crawling sometimes, maybe, you know, making a foot of progress in 1 year, we're still a foot closer to where we were going than we were. That's what we have to remember. So thank you, everyone, and I will see you next week.